A lawyer steals his wife's money while she is in a coma and runs away with her best friend. However, she wakes up and turns the tables, ruining all his plans. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Rachel Preston was known for her resilience, her sharp mind, and her generous spirit. As a philanthropist and CEO of a thriving nonprofit organization, she had built a reputation as someone who fought for the underprivileged. Her husband, Daniel, a high-profile lawyer, had often described her as the moral compass of their life together. But Rachel had no idea how far off course Daniel's compass had drifted. It began with the accident. On a rainy evening, Rachel's car skidded on the slick pavement and crashed into a divider. She was rushed to the hospital, her condition critical, and fell into a coma. As days turned into weeks, Daniel appeared the picture of a grieving husband, staying by her side and making medical decisions. Friends and colleagues offered their support, showering him with sympathy. Little did they know, Daniel was playing a different game entirely. While Rachel lay unconscious, Daniel took control of her accounts under the guise of managing medical expenses. But his motives were far from noble. Behind the scenes, he drained her personal savings, transferred the nonprofit's emergency funds to an offshore account, and sold her shares in a tech startup she had invested in years earlier. The total haul was staggering, enough to fund a life of luxury. Laura, Rachel's best friend and confidant, was Daniel's accomplice. She had stood by Rachel through thick and thin, but when Daniel proposed an illicit affair and a plan to run away together with Rachel's fortune, she didn't hesitate. Laura's loyalty to Rachel was eclipsed by her greed and the allure of starting a new life. Together, Daniel and Laura crafted a perfect exit strategy. Daniel kept up the grieving husband facade, even as he emptied Rachel's accounts. Laura, meanwhile, subtly distanced herself from Rachel's circle of friends, ensuring no one would connect the dots when the betrayal came to light. By the time Rachel had been in a coma for 3 months, Daniel and Laura were ready. They sold their assets, booked tickets to an exotic destination, and left the country. To those who asked about Daniel's absence, he claimed he needed time to grieve away from the constant reminders of Rachel's condition. But Rachel's story was far from over. Months later, Rachel woke up. Her body was weak, her mind foggy, but her determination was intact. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her husband's face was nowhere to be seen, and Laura, who had promised to look after Rachel during difficult times, was conspicuously absent. As Rachel recovered, she started piecing together the truth. The first clue came from her nurse, Samantha, who had grown close to Rachel during her stay. "Your husband hasn't been here in months," Samantha said hesitantly one day. "I'm so sorry, Rachel, but..." He told the staff he needed a fresh start. A fresh start. Rachel's voice was hoarse but steady. "What do you mean?" Samantha hesitated before revealing more. He withdrew from your accounts. All of them. He said it was for your care, but her voice trailed off. Rachel's heart sank. Weeks of rehabilitation passed, but her mind raced with questions. Where had Daniel gone? Why hadn't Laura visited? And most pressing of all, why had her bank accounts been emptied? When Rachel was strong enough to leave the hospital, she went home, only to find her house eerily empty. Furniture was gone, personal items were missing, and even her favorite family portraits had been removed. The emptiness hit her like a tidal wave, but instead of crumbling, Rachel's resolve hardened. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself, her voice filled with a quiet fury. Not by a long shot. Rachel hired a private investigator named Mark Caldwell, a retired detective known for his ability to uncover hidden truths. Together, they began tracing Daniel's movements. What they found was worse than Rachel had imagined. Mark uncovered a paper trail of transactions leading to offshore accounts in Daniel's name. He also found travel records showing Daniel and Laura had boarded a flight to the Maldives shortly after draining Rachel's accounts. Photos from social media confirmed their presence there, living a lavish lifestyle funded by Rachel's stolen wealth. "They thought you'd never wake up," Mark said grimly, showing Rachel the evidence. They were wrong, Rachel replied. Her eyes burned with determination. Rachel's next step was to consult her legal team. She had built a reputation as a fierce advocate for justice through her non-profit work, and now she would use every ounce of her knowledge to take back what was hers. She uncovered a critical detail. Years ago, she had created a backup trust fund that Daniel couldn't access without her explicit consent. It was the one asset he hadn't touched. "This is how we'll rebuild," Rachel told Mark. "He took everything, but he missed this. And I'm going to use it to destroy him." Rachel's plan was bold. She would not only reclaim her stolen assets but also ensure Daniel and Laura faced the full consequences of their actions. She contacted the authorities, froze the offshore accounts, and began the legal process to charge Daniel with fraud and embezzlement. But Rachel wasn't just fighting for her money. She was fighting to restore her name, her dignity, and the life they had tried to steal from her. As Rachel prepared for the battle ahead, she found herself transforming. No longer the trusting, idealistic woman who had believed in the best of people. She became a force of nature. She was methodical, unrelenting, and driven by a fire that refused to be extinguished. "They wanted to bury me," she said to herself one night as she reviewed documents in her dimly lit study. "But they didn't realize I was a seed." The stage was set. Rachel's awakening was only the beginning, and the storm she was about to unleash would leave no stone unturned. Rachel's transformation was not just emotional, it was strategic. She knew that taking down Daniel and Laura would require more than just anger. She needed to outthink and outmaneuver them at every step. The first battle would be reclaiming her assets, but the war was about exposing their betrayal to the world. Rachel's first move was securing the trust fund. She worked with her attorney, Evelyn Moore, a sharp and relentless litigator who had been one of Rachel's closest allies in her non-profit work. "This trust is untouchable," Evelyn confirmed, skimming through the documents. "Daniel must have overlooked it because it wasn't linked to your primary accounts." "Good," Rachel replied. "We'll use it to fund everything. Legal fees, investigators, and rebuilding the organization he tried to destroy." But Rachel had a bigger goal. She wanted Daniel and Laura's names dragged through the mud. For that, she needed solid evidence of their crimes. The first break came when Mark, her investigator, uncovered a critical piece of information. Daniel and Laura had used Rachel's non-profits funds to finance their extravagant getaway. It wasn't just fraud, it was a direct attack on the very people Rachel had dedicated her life to helping. "They set up fake invoices," Mark explained, laying out the evidence. "Donations meant for community projects were funneled into their personal accounts. It's disgusting." Rachel's hands trembled as she looked at the documents. "They didn't just steal from me. They stole from people who needed help the most." Evelyn placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "This will only strengthen your case. We'll make sure they pay for every cent." Rachel's next step was freezing Daniel's offshore accounts. Using the documentation Mark provided, Evelyn filed an emergency motion with the courts. Within days, the accounts were frozen, cutting off Daniel and Laura's access to Rachel's stolen money. News of the motion quickly reached Daniel, who was lounging on a private beach with Laura when he received the call. "What do you mean the accounts are frozen?" Daniel barked into the phone. "That's impossible. Rachel's in a coma." The voice on the other end hesitated. "She's awake, Mr. Preston. And she's filed charges against you." Daniel's face turned pale. He hung up without a word, his mind racing. Laura, sensing his panic, leaned over. "What's wrong?" "She's awake," he said through gritted teeth. "Rachel's awake." Laura's eyes widened in horror. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we're in trouble." Rachel didn't stop there. She began rebuilding her nonprofit, reaching out to old donors and sharing her story. She refused to let Daniel's betrayal define her or tarnish the legacy she had worked so hard to create. In a heartfelt press conference, Rachel addressed the scandal for the first time. "I trusted someone who betrayed me," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I refused to let their greed and selfishness destroy what we've built. Together we'll rise again." Her speech went viral, garnering public sympathy and support. Donations poured in, and Rachel's nonprofit was back on its feet. But for Rachel, the real victory would come when Daniel and Laura were held accountable. The legal battle began with a bang. Evelyn filed multiple charges against Daniel, including fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. She also filed a civil suit against Laura for her role in the scheme. Daniel and Laura, now back in the country and scrambling for a defense, were blindsided by the strength of Rachel's case. Evelyn had left no stone unturned, presenting irrefutable evidence of their crimes. In court, Rachel made her presence known. Sitting in the front row, dressed impeccably, she radiated strength and determination. Daniel avoided her gaze, but Laura couldn't resist sneaking glances, her expression a mix of guilt and fear. The prosecution's case was airtight. Witnesses testified about Daniel's fraudulent activities, and financial experts detailed the trail of stolen funds. Evelyn's cross-examinations were brutal, exposing every lie and contradiction in Daniel and Laura's statements. The turning point came when Rachel herself took the stand. Facing Daniel and Laura directly, she recounted the betrayal and the impact it had on her life. "You didn't just steal my money," Rachel said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You stole my trust, my dignity, and my belief in the people I loved. But you underestimated me. I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor." The courtroom was silent as her words hung in the air. Even the judge looked moved. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Laura's face flushed with shame. As the trial neared its conclusion, Rachel delivered one final blow. Evelyn presented a recording that Mark had uncovered, an incriminating conversation between Daniel and Laura, in which they arrogantly discussed their plans to live off Rachel's money, believing she would never wake up. The jury's reaction was immediate. Gasps filled the courtroom, and Daniel's attorney buried his head in his hands. The evidence was damning. Rachel watched as Daniel and Laura's facade crumbled. For the first time, she felt a sense of closure. She had fought back and she was winning. By the time the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts, Rachel's reputation had been restored. Her non-profit was thriving, and she had reclaimed her life. But Rachel wasn't done yet. She had one final move to make, a move that would ensure Daniel and Laura faced not just legal consequences but public disgrace as well. The stage was set for Rachel's ultimate act of justice. The reckoning was far from over. Rachel's victory in court was only the beginning. While Daniel and Laura awaited sentencing, Rachel prepared her final move to ensure they faced not only legal consequences but also public humiliation. She wanted the world to see them for who they truly were, stripping away any remaining veneer of respectability. The first step was reclaiming her story. Rachel worked with a journalist from a major publication to reveal the full extent of Daniel and Laura's betrayal. The article, titled "Awake and Unbroken: How One Woman Fought Back Against Betrayal," detailed Rachel's journey from the accident to her fight for justice. It included damning evidence of Daniel's fraud and Laura's complicity, painting a vivid picture of their deception. The story went viral, capturing the public's imagination. Rachel became a symbol of resilience and strength, while Daniel and Laura were universally condemned. Social media exploded with outrage, with people demanding harsh sentences and even more justice. As Rachel's star rose, Daniel and Laura's world fell apart. Their faces were plastered across every news outlet, and former friends and colleagues distanced themselves. Laura, once the epitome of poise, was seen in public looking disheveled and panicked. Daniel, who had thrived on his reputation as a top lawyer, was disbarred and forced to sell what little assets he had left to cover mounting legal fees. One day, Rachel received a message from Laura. It was a desperate plea for forgiveness. "I didn't know it would go this far," Laura wrote. "Please, Rachel, I was weak and I made a mistake. Can we meet and talk?" Rachel stared at the message, her feelings a whirlwind of anger and pity. But she knew Laura's remorse wasn't genuine. It was born of desperation, not sincerity. Rachel ignored the message, choosing instead to focus on what truly mattered: rebuilding her life and protecting her non-profit. Daniel, however, was not done scheming. In a final, desperate act, he tried to appeal the court's decision, claiming that Rachel had set him up. The appeal was weak and filled with baseless accusations, but it forced Rachel to relive the trauma during another round of legal proceedings. This time Rachel was ready. She presented new evidence uncovered by Mark, a hidden account Daniel had tried to keep secret even from Laura. It showed additional funds he had stolen from the non-profit and transferred under a fake name. The appeal backfired spectacularly, with the judge not only denying it but also adding additional charges to Daniel's sentence. When Daniel realized he had no way out, he finally broke. During a court-mandated mediation session, he begged Rachel for leniency. "I was wrong," he said, his voice trembling. "I made terrible choices and I hurt you. Please, don't destroy me completely." Rachel looked at him, her face calm but unyielding. "You destroyed yourself, Daniel. You made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences." With Daniel and Laura's sentencing finalized, 10 years in prison for Daniel and 5 for Laura, Rachel turned her attention to the future. She poured her energy into expanding her non-profit, creating new programs to help victims of financial abuse. She also set up a scholarship fund for young women pursuing careers in law, ensuring they would have the resources to fight for justice. But Rachel had one final move to make. On the day Daniel and Laura were transferred to prison, Rachel held a press conference. Standing before a crowd of reporters, she addressed the world one last time. "This is not a story of revenge," Rachel said, her voice strong. "This is a story of accountability. People like Daniel Preston and Laura Jenkins believe they can take without consequence. They think they can betray the trust of others and escape justice. But today, we've proven that no one is above the law." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'm not here to celebrate their downfall. I'm here to remind everyone that resilience is the greatest weapon we have against betrayal. They tried to bury me, but I grew back stronger." The crowd erupted into applause, and Rachel felt a sense of closure. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her legacy. Months later, Rachel sat in her newly rebuilt office, a cup of coffee in hand. Mark visited to deliver his final report on Daniel and Laura. "They're both settling into prison life," he said with a wry smile. "Not exactly the luxury they're used to." Rachel chuckled softly. "Good. Let them experience what it feels like to lose everything." Mark hesitated before speaking again. "Rachel, I've worked on a lot of cases, but yours? It's something else. Most people would have crumbled. But you turned it all around." Rachel smiled, her eyes sparkling with determination. "Because they underestimated me, Mark. They thought I was weak, but they forgot one thing." "What's that?" "I don't break." As Rachel looked out the window, the sun setting on the horizon, she felt a deep sense of peace. The storm was over, and she had emerged victorious. Her journey wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming her power and proving that betrayal could never define her. Rachel Preston was awake, unbroken, and ready for whatever came next. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.